You're watching Saturday Anime on the Sci-Fi Channel.
Greetings, this is Reverend Paul, and this, of course, is Studio Chojin Raw. Now, today we're going to be talking about Gunbuster, and let's just get right to it, shall we? Gunbuster is a 6-episode OVA series, and it was released between October 1988 and July 1989. Gunbuster is considered one of the all-time great classic animes, and it was an anime that in many ways defined the 1980s. Gunbuster is probably also most well known for being the directorial debut for one Hideaki Anno. And Hideaki Anno is a name that viewers of this channel should be familiar with. Hideaki Anno is the visionary director behind Nadia, Secret of Blue Water, Shin Godzilla, and of course, Neon Genesis Evangelion. Gunbuster was also an early production for Gainax. I think it's fair to describe Gunbuster as kind of a prototype for Evangelion. In a lot of ways, Gunbuster is like the Street Fighter Alpha to Evangelion's Street Fighter 2. Gunbuster tells the story of a young girl named Noriko Takaya. And Noriko Takaya is a typical Japanese girl who idolizes her father. Because you see, her father is a dude who serves in the military. He is an honorable man and he commands his own starship. Unfortunately, Noriko's father is killed one day when his ship is attacked by space monsters. When Noriko learns of her father's death, it's at that moment she decides to follow in her father's footsteps and join the military to become a mech pilot. In the first episode of Gunbuster, we see Noriko living her life as a bubbly high schooler, and she tells her best friend Kimiko that she wants to become a mech pilot. In fact, one could even say Noriko is kinda obsessed with the idea of becoming a mech pilot. But like a lot of anime heroes in their first episode, Noriko is pretty fucking terrible at the things she wants to do. But that's okay, because Noriko has determination, she has fucking moxie, and she's gonna fucking work hard and be the best mech pilot in this school. In fact, she wants to be a mech pilot that's just as good as her hero, Kasumi Amano. And Kasumi Amano is pretty impressive. Not only is she a great fucking mech pilot, but she's got brains and she's fucking hot as hell. Everybody in the school idolizes Kasumi Amano because, as you could see for yourself, Kasumi Amano is badass. Things start to get a little bit dicey when the girl's normal mech coach is replaced by a new dude. And this fucking new coach, he's a fucking badass dude as well. What I haven't mentioned yet is that the death of Noriko's father has set off an intergalactic war between space monsters and humans. And it turns out that not everybody aboard Noriko's father's ship was killed. There was one survivor, and that survivor is the new coach, Coach Oda. And Coach Oda is looking for recruits to join in the war effort to pilot mechs and kill these alien sons of bitches before they take over the galaxy. Now, the coach only has 2 open positions for female mech pilots. So that does raise the question, out of all these hot mech pilot chicks, who will he choose? It does seem pretty obvious that Kasumi will be his first pick, because she is the best mech pilot. I mean, they call her the fucking Rose Queen. She's so fucking good at piloting mechs. But who will be the number 2 pick? Personally, I think the best pick would be a chick named Kashihara. She's not as good as Kasumi, but she's a pretty decent mech pilot, and it seems like she's a pretty crazy bitch too. I think that would be an asset when fighting space monsters. So my pick for Kasumi's partner, the very crazy Kashihara. Sure, that may be a controversial pick, but the only alternative would be to pick Noriko, and it seems pretty obvious the coach will not pick Noriko because she is the most inexperienced. She's only been piloting a mech for a month, and there is no way in hell the coach would ever choose Noriko. So needless to say, the next day when the coach chooses Noriko, people are kind of freaked out. The school erupts in a fucking commotion. I mean, they cannot believe that Noriko would be chosen over much better fucking capable candidates. Even Kashihara is fucking pissed off too. So in order to prove Noriko does not have what it takes to be a mech pilot, she challenges Noriko to a fucking duel. And Noriko and Kashihara fucking battle it out in their fucking mechs in front of the entire school. And Noriko beats the shit out of fucking Kashihara. Like, sure, okay, Kashihara gets a couple of punches on Noriko, but Noriko does a fucking lightning kick and beats the shit out of fucking Kashihara, proving at this second second at the very least, that Noriko was the right choice to be Kasumi's partner. I also think it's worth mentioning that the first episode of Gunbuster is an almost scene-for-scene parody of the first couple of episodes of the 1970s anime Aim for the Ace. And Aim for the Ace was about a high school girl named Hiromi who wanted to be a great tennis player, and she idolized another girl from her school who was a great tennis player, a girl named Ryuzaki. Also in Aim for the Ace, the regular tennis coach kind of goes away and a brand new tennis coach shows up. And to everybody's surprise, for the big tennis tournament, the coach takes the less experienced Hiromi and pairs her with the much more experienced Ryuzaki. And it's not just the overall plot of the first episode of Gunbuster. Gunbuster even borrows little elements from Aim for the Ace. For example, the scene of Noriko sitting on a tack that was cruelly placed in her mech by Kashihara is a direct reference to the scene in Aim for the Ace where Hiromi's rival Kyoko puts a tack in Hiromi's shoe. Also, Gunbuster's mech training sequences are a deliberate homage to the training sequences in Aim for the Ace. Even the character designs of Gunbuster are heavily inspired by the characters of Aim for the Ace. You look at Noriko, and her shoulder-length brown hair does bear a resemblance to the shoulder-length brown hair of Hiromi. Even Kasumi just kind of looks like Ryuzaki with a different hair color. And Coach Oda in Gunbuster has a very similar color palette to the coach in Aim for the Ace. And if all of those references weren't making it clear that Gunbuster is an obvious parody of Aim for the Ace, the Japanese title of Gunbuster is Aim for the Top. In the second episode of Gunbuster, Kasumi, Noriko, and the coach leave the high school and go to the space station Silver Star. While on the Silver Star, they happen to meet another mech pilot, a chick named Young. And Young serves as another sort of rival for Noriko and Kasumi. In a lot of ways, she just kind of feels like a replacement Kashihara. As the series progresses, we learn that the coach isn't just looking for any old mech pilots. He is looking for mech pilots to pilot Gunbuster. And Gunbuster is like the fucking most awesome mech in the galaxy. It's certainly one of the biggest. I think Gunbuster is something like half the size of Tokyo Tower. He's fucking huge. So over time, Noriko and Kasumi become pretty awesome Gunbuster pilots. Now, Gunbuster is a short series. It's only 6 episodes long. But because it's a Hideaki Anno series, it's not your conventional 6-episode OVA. It's actually very interesting how the story of Gunbuster unfolds. The first episode of Gunbuster is a straight-out high school comedy. It has some melodramatic elements, but the first episode of Gunbuster plays up the comedic elements to full effect. Tonally, the first episode of Gunbuster is an exact copy of Aim for the Ace. And when we get to the second episode of Gunbuster, we start to find a lot of the comedy elements fall to the wayside, and the story starts to get a little bit more serious. And by the time we get to the third episode of Gunbuster, we are in a full-on space opera. I think a lot of people might criticize the story of Gunbuster for being underdeveloped. The show is only 6 episodes long, and it is trying to squeeze a lot into very little time. But this is another interesting aspect about Gunbuster. Gunbuster, even after this first episode, is still parodying Aim for the Ace. It's not doing it as directly as the first episode, but it is keeping all the melodrama that would appear in Aim for the Ace. Like the sudden reveal that the coach is dying and the sudden reveal that Kasumi is in love with the coach. These are all things that would happen in Aim for the Ace. And even though Gunbuster is kind of an incomplete picture because the story is missing a lot of the details, all of the broad strokes are there. Everything kind of makes sense. Even though it comes out of nowhere that the coach is dying and Kasumi is in love with the coach, it makes sense. We could understand it. Like, okay, like, yeah, I kind of suspected something was going on between them. So even though the plot to Gunbuster suffers because it's missing a lot of the details, it's never confusing, and I feel like you could still appreciate the story for being what it is. Now, I mentioned before that Gunbuster copies the element from Aim for the Ace, where Kashihara is the clear favorite to be the partner of Kasumi, and then the coach picks Noriko, and that pisses everybody off. And that's a direct reference to the plot line in Aim for the Ace, when the coach picks Hiromi instead of Kyoko to be Ryuzaki's partner. And another thing Gunbuster copies from Aim for the Ace is the scene where the character that was supposed to get the position confronts the coach. So Gunbuster has a scene where Kashihara confronts Coach Oda and asks him point blankly, why did you give her the spot and not me? And then the coach refuses to tell her. He says, well, if you don't know, then I ain't gonna tell you. That same same scene happens in Aim for the Ace. What Aim for the Ace has that Gunbuster does not have is that there is a scene where Kyoko finally cannot take it, and then she confronts the coach and demands that he tells her, why did you pick Hiromi and not me? And the coach tells Kyoko the reason he cut her is because even though she's a good tennis player, she's just a pale copy of Ryuzaki. And she is never going to be great because she will always just be a pale imitation. And that to me is a fascinating idea because I feel like this is a good way to describe Hideaki Anno as a filmmaker, because Hideaki Anno is a very clear lover of genre and sci-fi. He is a geek like everybody else. And a lot of his work references other things. Famously, Evangelion is kind of a deconstruction of the mech genre. Gunbuster, similar to Evangelion, starts off as a high school comedy and then becomes this serious space opera. In both instances, Anno is working with tropes, and he is playing around with the fact that the viewers are familiar with these kind of tropes. In the case of Gunbuster, he is playing with the plot of Aim for the Ace to establish his universe. But he is not content with just ripping off Aim for the Ace. He is using that as a springboard to tell a different story. And it's almost as if Hideaki Anno is taking the advice of the coach, where you cannot be a carbon copy. You have to be original. I think it's fair to say that Hideaki Anno is very similar to a filmmaker like Quentin Tarantino, in the sense that they both like to work within genres and they both like to reference pre-existing material. But they only reference pre-existing material as a way to tell their own unique stories. To me, what makes Gunbuster interesting is not the story. To me, what makes Gunbuster interesting is the themes and the way the show explores those themes. When you strip away the mechs and the cute anime girls and all the sci-fi, you come to realize that Gunbuster is a story about sacrifice. Specifically, the way war forces combatants to sacrifice their lives. Like a lot of anime from the 80s, Gunbuster has very heavy World War II symbolism. We can see this in a lot of the uniforms the characters are wearing, and the crew of the Excellion kind of feel like they were pulled from a World War II submarine. And one interesting science fiction idea about Gunbuster is this idea of time dilation. When you're traveling at light speed, time is slowing down for you but speeding up for everybody else. When you travel long distances in space at the speed of light, you're going to stay the same age while everybody else grows old around you. And this is an idea that Gunbuster explores, and it is central to the theme because everybody in the military completely loses their ability to have a normal life. At the core of the first episode of Gunbuster is Noriko and her relationship with her best friend Kimiko. But when Noriko joins the military and she becomes a mech pilot, and then she starts spending all of her time in space, time begins to slow down for her, and Kimiko grows old. She becomes an older woman, she has a child, and Noriko stays the same age. She is perpetually a teenager, and that episode, the 5th episode of Gunbuster, is a very poignant episode where we see how Noriko, in her quest to kind of avenge her father and bring honor to the memory of her father, she has completely sacrificed the ability to have a life. All of her friends have grown old, and she's still exactly where she was. And the last episode of Gunbuster is extremely interesting as well. The last episode of Gunbuster is stylistically very different from the rest of the series. The last episode of Gunbuster has very little to no comedy, and the entire episode is filmed in black and white. And there's a specific reason for this, because you see, episode 6 of Gunbuster takes place 15 years after the 5th episode. At least it does from Kasumi's perspective. From Noriko's perspective, only 6 months have passed. And I think this is the key reason why this episode is in black and white, because this episode is being told from Kasumi's perspective. Kasumi is no longer a teenager. She's an older, mature woman. She is a widow. She has recently lost her husband. She has lived a life, and she has lost that colorful optimism that she had when she was a young woman. And the ending of Gunbuster is very powerful because at the end of the episode, Noriko and Kasumi manage to destroy the space monsters. But when they get back to Earth, 12,000 years has passed. They have won the war, but they have lost everything. The ending to Gunbuster is extremely sad. This war, the war of the space monsters, even though Noriko and Kasumi single-handedly won the war, they have lost everything. They have no lives anymore. Everything they knew is gone, and everybody they loved is dead. The world they fought for, the world they fought to protect, doesn't exist anymore. This is showing us the price of war. Even if you win a war, war strips away everything you have. When you look at Gunbuster in that regard, it's a very clear anti-war allegory. I also think there's another way to kind of interpret the time dilation idea in Gunbuster. I feel like Gunbuster is almost taking its female characters and it turns them into almost like these godlike beings. Think about it. The women in Gunbuster are these perfect, beautiful women who operate these impressive suits of armor, and they're practically immortal. They never age. They're these kind of perfect beauties that remain that way forever. And they are detached from like the normal human world. It's almost like the female characters in Gunbuster become these kind of like celestial guardian angels of the planet Earth. The time dilation aspect of the show is what makes the show so interesting. And it's one of the reasons why I think it persists as a real staple of science fiction anime. Even though the story of Gunbuster is kind of handicapped by the fact that the creative team was limited to 6 episodes, even though the story kind of suffers as a result of that, I do think the characterizations in this series work. And you really have to give credit to the writers of Gunbuster, which were Hideaki Anno, Toshio Okada, and Hiroyuki Yamaga. And Okada and Yamaga should be familiar to fans of Gainax because Yamada was the director of Wings of the Hanamis, and Okada is probably best known for his writing on Otaku no Video. The writing team of Gunbuster does a really great job in fleshing out these characters. You can't help but see Anno's touch with the way the characters are depicted. Anno does a great job of world building. I just love rooms in Anno's work. Anytime there's a character in a room in an Anno animation or an Anno film, the room always feels lived in. Like Noriko has a Van Halen poster and a fucking Nausicaa poster on her bedroom wall. Just those little details really kind of flesh out Noriko as a character. And even Noriko's journey over the course of the series is very believable, where she goes from being this kind of bubbly high school girl to this somewhat hardened veteran of war. I think the most brilliant scene in Gunbuster is the scene where Noriko goes out into space with Torrin Smith. I guess he's American? The American boy pilot. After Noriko falls out with Kasumi, she teams up with Torrin Smith and they decide to go out and fight aliens. And it's a scene that feels very realistic and it feels very genuine in depicting the horrors of war and the kind of futility of war and just how war leaves you feeling so empty. Noriko and Smith are trying to fight off these alien monsters, and Noriko hears Smith giving her orders over the radio, and then suddenly Smith stops talking and Noriko's calling out to him and he's not there. And it becomes very clear Smith is dead, but he doesn't die in a dramatic explosion. He doesn't die heroically. He dies in this very kind of sad, matter-of-fact manner where he was on the radio and then now he's not. And then the sequence that follows that with Noriko solemnly flying back to the spaceship, just kind of like looking around hoping she'll find Smith, but she never does. There is no answer. We don't know what happens to him. And that is a much more realistic depiction of death and war than anything you might see in another science fiction anime. I think the visuals of Gunbuster are incredible. When people talk about 1980s anime always looking better than like anything today, Gunbuster is definitely a great example of that. Gunbuster in a lot of ways defines kind of the 1980s anime aesthetic. Gainax really hit it out of the park with the animation in this show. I think Gunbuster is like the best looking thing Gainax ever did. It looks so cool. I mean, it looks so much better than Evangelion even, which came out 10 years later. I think the visuals of Gunbuster are outstanding. The design of the Gunbuster mech is really cool. There's a very clear 70s influence in the design of Gunbuster. Now that I think of it, Gunbuster almost kind of feels like a updated version of Mazinger Z. The design of Gunbuster also feels very much of the 80s. He very much has that big battle robot aesthetic. He encapsulates that 80s idea of bigger is better. The mech design team on Gunbuster really was kind of an all-star cast of mech designers. The Gunbuster mech design team consisted of Kazutaka Miyatake, Koichi Ohara, and Mahiro Maeda. Miyatake Akane is a veteran of the Macross and Gundam series. Mahiro Maeda has been an important part of the Evangelion animation team for every single installment of Evangelion. And Koichi Ohara, he is the man, the myth, the legend, the creator of fucking MD Geist. How can you not love MD Geist? Even though the mechs are kind of the draw of this series, I think the chicks are the real stars of this show, and the character designs by Haruhiko Mikimoto are incredible. Mikimoto's character design scream space opera. If you're creating an anime sci-fi space opera and it's the 1980s, then you totally need Haruhiko Mikimoto. You know, I mean, his character designs in Macross are incredible, and he brings that same consistency here with Gunbuster. I don't know what I can say about Mikimoto's designs that haven't been said before. I mean, he really is a brilliant designer. His girls are slender, they're very sexy, and what I think is really great about his designs, what set his designs apart from so many other great artists, is that he has this really cool way of drawing eyes. The girls Mikimoto draws have these very kind of impressionistic eyes, and they always look like their eyes are full of tears, so it gives his characters this kind of vulnerability, almost a sadness. It's one of the unique qualities of his art, and it's what makes him stand out as an artist. And these character designs in Gunbuster are awesome. Noriko is cute and sexy, and Kasumi is the sexy older sister type character, and Young is the sexy redhead chick. They're all fucking sexy and hot, and we all get to see them naked, which is awesome. Not only is Gunbuster an awesome anime, but it gave us the Gainax fucking pose with the fucking cross in the arms. That shit was invented by this. If you hate everything about Gunbuster, the thing you need to love about Gunbuster is that Gunbuster invented the Gainax bounce. It basically invented the anime titty bounce. This is the first anime that I could think of that had awesome bouncing anime boobs. It's fucking awesome. And the animator credited for coming up with the Gainax bounce is the one and only Yoshiyuki Sadamoto, the character designer to Neon Genesis Evangelion. This dude who gave us these cool characters like Rei and Asuka, gave us the anime titty bounce. This guy's a fucking hero, man. Give this motherfucker a Nobel Prize. It seems pretty clear to me Hideaki Anno knows how to handle bouncing anime titties. Just like the dinosaurs in the original Jurassic Park, the titties in Gunbuster are used sparingly, but effectively. Every time a fucking titty bounce shows up in Gunbuster, it is the perfect time for a fucking titty bounce. How can you not love Gunbuster? It has bouncing boobs and mechs. Now, look, as far as I'm concerned, Gunbuster could have just had no plot and just been topless chicks in space just fucking bouncing around and shaking their tits all day. That would have been fucking awesome. But I realize fan service is not for everybody, and if you're somebody who finds excessive fan service distracting, then you will appreciate Gunbuster, because Gunbuster is one of the animes that does fan service right. I also wanted to mention the voice acting cast in Gunbuster, which all do a really great job. Noriko is played by Noriko Hidaka, and Noriko Hidaka is probably best known to anime fans as the voice of Akane in Ranma and the voice of Jean in Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water. And it's no coincidence that Noriko the character and Noriko the actress have the same name, because the character of Noriko was actually named after Hidaka. Kasumi is played by Rei Sakuma, who is best known as Leona from the new Dominion Tank Police, and she was Morrigan in the Darkstalkers anime. I think the person who really kind of steals the show is Norio Wakamoto as Coach Oda. Norio Wakamoto is an awesome actor. He brings a lot of intensity to the coach, and he's great. I mean, especially during the chibi science sequences where the coach just comes out of nowhere, like those things are fucking hilarious. And Wakamoto is hysterical. I don't think he gets enough credit as a comedic actor, but he is very funny. What I also think is interesting about the casting of Norio Wakamoto is that Norio Wakamoto is probably best known to a lot of anime fans as playing villains. Wakamoto played Father Anderson in Hellsing. He played Cell in Dragon Ball Z. He was Vicious in Cowboy Bebop. He was Lisker in the original Guyver OVA. And I think that's pretty interesting when we start thinking about the character of the coach, and when we start thinking about the fact that Gunbuster is kind of like a proto-Evangelion, because a lot of the characters in Gunbuster are kind of prototypes for Evangelion characters. Noriko is kind of like a prototype for Shinji. Kasumi is kind of a prototype for Rei. Young is a prototype for Asuka. And the coach is a prototype for Gendo. And given what we know about Gendo in the Evangelion series, and given the fact that Wakamoto usually plays villains, it's interesting to think about what kind of character arc the coach would have had if Gunbuster was a 24 episode anime series. It's completely possible that if this was a longer series, it would have been revealed that the coach was more of a villain than a hero. I don't know, it's just something interesting to think about. Also, since we're on the topic of voice acting, it's worth mentioning that there is no dub to Gunbuster. Gunbuster is one of those animes that never had a dubbed version, but that is going to change because the good people at Discotek Media are actually doing a remaster of Gunbuster, and they're also doing an all-new English dub track, which is going to be awesome. I mean, Discotek Media really has become the heroes of the classic anime scene. They're really taking a lot of these old school animes and they're giving them the love and attention they deserve. I mentioned before that there's a HD re-release coming of Project A-ko, which I am totally pumped for, and I think this re-release of Gunbuster is going to be awesome as well. So with all that said, I really love Gunbuster. It is not a perfect show. As I said before, the story kind of suffers. They never explain what happened to Noriko's mother. I also wish there was more action. It is kind of a shame that we never get to see the Gunbuster in all of its full action glory. We just see Noriko when she starts out as the Gunbuster pilot, and we see Noriko during the end of her career as a Gunbuster pilot. But we never get Noriko in the prime of her life as a Gunbuster pilot. And I wish we would have got to see that part of the story, but that is not the story Hideaki Anno wanted to tell. Hideaki Anno wanted to tell more of a story that focused on the price of war and not necessarily the cool action that might happen during a war. I really could kind of go on and talk about Gunbuster forever. This show has so many layers to it, and that's a testament to the team that created it, especially Hideaki Anno. Gunbuster is visually powerful, it is emotionally compelling. Gunbuster is an awesome anime. Even with its flaws, it is incredible. It is the definition of an imperfect masterpiece, and I recommend everybody go and check out Gunbuster. This week's question comes from SS, and SS writes, "You mentioned before being a fan of the Angry Video Game Nerd, and I was wondering what did you think of the AVGN movie, if you've seen it, and if you thought it worked or not?" Thank you, SS, for sending in a question. Yes, I am a fan of the Angry Video Game Nerd. I especially love his early videos, like Castlevania, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Those really, really early Angry Video Game Nerd videos have this rawness to them that I think is great. It actually reminds me a lot of Kevin Smith's Clerks. That same kind of raw energy you see in the first Clerks movie, that same energy is there in early Angry Video Game Nerd episodes. And I think that's what makes those episodes so good. I've kind of lost interest in the Angry Video Game Nerd as the series went along because his recent videos they don't have that rawness, and it just kind of feels like he's going through the motions. He makes a living off of these videos, and he has a formula for the Angry Video Game Nerd, and people like that formula, so that's what he's going to do. So newer Angry Video Game Nerd episodes, I don't find all that interesting. And yes, I have seen the Angry Video Game Nerd movie. I saw it a while ago, but I did see it. And I did not think the Angry Video Game Nerd movie was very good. And to me, it doesn't feel like it captured the feeling of his original videos. I feel like the Angry Video Game Nerd movie is a bit of a missed opportunity because I think James Rolfe raised something like, I don't know, $250,000 for that movie. He raised a ridiculous amount of money for that movie. And unfortunately, the movie is not that good. And there are better movies that were made for less money. And some of these movies launched careers. The aforementioned Clerks by Kevin Smith was made for something like $20,000. And that launched Kevin Smith's career as a Hollywood filmmaker. El Mariachi by Robert Rodriguez was made for something like $8,000. And that launched Robert Rodriguez's career. I think it's kind of a bummer that James Rolfe had this opportunity, not only make a film, but kind of launch his film career as a filmmaker, which is what it seems like he wants to do. And it feels like he kind of missed that opportunity because I think one of the problems with the Angry Video Game Nerd movie is that he made a movie that his fans were going to like. And the problem with doing that is that I think his fans were going to like anything he did. I feel like he probably should have taken a little bit more of a chance and maybe did a film that had a little bit more appeal than the film that he made. Because, the Angry Video Game Nerd movie just kind of feels like a 2-hour YouTube video. I wish he would have, instead of just making this crazy 2-hour-long YouTube video that his fans were going to eat up, I wish he like challenged himself a little bit more and made a movie that would have a little bit more appeal to people outside the AVGN bubble. I've often sat in my office and as a thought exercise, I've tried to think, how can you make an AVGN movie that can cross over to other audiences? And I thought, like, I think a cool idea for an AVGN movie would be like almost like a Harold and Kumar. Imagine if there was like a AVGN movie where the nerd is just chilling out in his basement and then he gets a call from a friend of his saying, hey dude, I got this fucking crazy game. You got to come over and check it out. And then he's like, all right, I'll be right there. And then the whole movie is just him in the car driving to this person's house to check out this game. And he just keeps getting into weird adventures along the way. Like, I think that could have been a cool idea. I was even thinking like it might be interesting if James Rolfe took almost like a Kevin Smith approach with the AVGN movie, where instead of making this huge epic, he kind of scaled the movie back and he just kind of told the story about the nerd and the people around him. Like, what if the movie was about the nerd like finding some old school video game like a Mario Party and then like calling up a bunch of his friends like, hey, come over, we're all gonna play Mario Party. And then the movie is just like them hanging out, playing Mario Party, talking to each other, and other people come over and then they start talking, and then chicks start coming over and they could talk to the chicks, and then other people can kind of break away from the game and go to different parts of the house and have different comedic adventures or something like that. I don't know, something grounded like that to me feels like there's a lot more opportunity to be creative and you could have a lot more appeal to people outside of your limited little bubble. I don't know. This is just me kind of like waxing poetic about it. I mean, I guess if you just wanted to see the nerd curse and do crazy shit, then that's all he needed to do, and that's an awesome movie. I think James Rolfe is a great filmmaker. I think his Bored James short horror films are incredible. He has a real gift for psychological horror. And to me, it's a real shame that the AVGN film did not launch his career as a filmmaker the way films like El Mariachi launched the career of Rob Rodriguez. To me, it's kind of a shame that we don't get to see James Rolfe do other things than Angry Video Game Nerd. I'm sorry, I know that was long-winded. I hope it answered your question. If you have a question, if you have a complaint, if you have a comment, if you'd like to make a recommendation, send me an email at studiochojin@gmail.com, and I will be happy to read it on a future edition of Studio Chojin Raw. That wraps up this week's edition of Studio Chojin Raw. I hope you enjoyed the video. In the coming weeks, we're going to be talking about La Blue Girl, we're going to be talking about Jushin Liger, and we're going to be trying to do some different stuff. There's a couple of editorial type videos that I'm going to post just to mix things up. You know, we're living fucking crazy. We're living dangerously here at Studio Chojin. If you want to support the channel, if you like Studio Chojin and would like to support this channel, you could always leave a comment, you could like the video, you could share the video. Anything you do is greatly appreciated. And with that said, this is Reverend Paul saying, until we meet again.